Well, happy Thanksgiving. Hope it was good. I probably fit in that category of both. It was great and we survived it. We had two young men from France. My son-in-law is French, and he had a couple friends come, so they got to experience their first American Thanksgiving. And in the midst of that, they were cooking us some beef bourguignon, and they don't eat until like 8 o'clock at night. And so somewhere between they started preparing and the actual meal, I was in incredible pain. And my wife immediately reminded me that seems like maybe a kidney stone again, which has happened to me back in 2019. I woke up on our 25th wedding anniversary with a kidney stone. And she was right. I was like, oh my gosh, I think you're right. And I don't know if you've ever had a kidney stone. I do not recommend it. Drink as much water as you can. And so she's driving me to the ER. She's praying for me. And we get there and it is gone. The pain is gone. So it's a miracle. And or it moved from the kidney to the bladder. I don't know. It's either, maybe both. So we then went to a doctor to make sure it wasn't appendicitis because we didn't want to go to the ER. And in the end, we made it home in time for the beef bourguignon. No more pain. Then Thursday, we hosted all these folks, and it was my first time to ever help. It may be the last time. I usually do the dishes, but Deborah almost kicked me out of the kitchen as I'm her helper. Normally there's a sister or a mom, but this year that didn't happen. And so she tells me my first job is cut the eggs for the deviled eggs. And I cut them like this instead of long ways. And so that was, I almost got fired. And then Friday we went to Dallas and back, and that was with her side. Then Saturday we had 30 Bryants over, and it was an amazing time, but I'm exhausted. But now we can play Christmas songs freely, right? It's now officially Christmas time. And what's nice about Christmas music, right? These songs about joy and about Jesus, about presents and about family, they are on repeat all month. But you know, there's something about a generation's songs. Like, what are the songs that you have on repeat in your life? You know, in some generations, it may be that crackle of vinyl spinning Motown harmonies. Or for other generations, maybe it's the unmistakable intro of a 90s ballad that could make the whole room sing on cue. Or for many of us, it may have been the songs that you grew up singing in church. Maybe those are songs that you've latched onto that take you back to a different time. In this mixtape series, we've tried to drive home the truth that music has a profound way of shaping us, sometimes more than we realize. It's, in a sense, one of the earliest spiritual disciplines that we practice without even knowing that we're doing it. Long before you understand more about who God is, you probably understood a melody. Long before you knew the vocabulary of singing as part of worship, you felt something stir when you heard a spiritual song sung by people who really believe what they're singing. We've been referring to the words of Paul, who was writing to the church in Colossae, a town which is in modern-day Turkey. He writes these words. He says, "Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit." He was trying to help them align their hearts to what is true in a world where we believe in a loving God who's come to rescue us, a God who will one day make all things right. See, aligning our hearts to what's true, to sing with each other about the truth of who God is vital because the truth you and I sing becomes the truth that we live. If music is one of the tools that God uses to form his people, then we should pay attention to the soundtrack of our souls. This week, as we explore the theme, what's on repeat, we're leaning into this idea. The songs we repeat don't just entertain us, they form us. And so of those three types of songs, we've looked at the other two. Today we're looking at hymns. These are structured, truth-rich songs about the everlasting character of God, his attributes. And these are passed on from generation to generation. We sing songs that are like hymns even today. And let's look at the three truths about what we put on repeat. First of all, what you repeat, you remember. Mother Teresa once said, repetition isn't mindless. It's how the heart learns what the mind forgets. Moses, speaking to the people of Israel 3,000 years ago, or even further back, 3,500 years ago, was trying to instill in them how to help the message of God go from one generation to the next. And listen to what he says. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. And there's two important parts about this particular passage. The first is the beginning part of this passage is called the Shema. It's an important part of the Jewish culture. It's repeated at least twice a day, once in the morning and once before bed. It's also recited on someone's deathbed. For the Jewish people, it's vital in understanding who God is and passing that on to the next generation. You might recognize the Shema from the moment when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? And they were referring to the Hebrew Scriptures, which has 611 commands. And Jesus said this, to love your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. He took the Shema and then added this selfless part to it. The second important part of this is notice how often we're supposed to repeat the Shema, this understanding of God. These commands are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about it at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands. Bind them on your foreheads. Write them on your door frames and on your gates. That short passage tells us to repeat these commands a total of 10 different ways. Repetition is vital to remembering. Now, we do have to be careful not to just repeat things from rote memory where there's no meaning or importance. In fact, Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 in the Sermon on the Mount warns against this vain repetition of using a lot of empty words. But even still, it's important that we remember that repetition matters. There's a reason that certain songs unlock memories that we thought were lost. A melody from childhood can instantly transport you back to the back seat of the minivan. A chorus from a youth group retreat can refill a moment with God that you had forgotten. Or even then the first 2 seconds of a 90s pop song can bring you back to the smell of your high school gym. Why is that? It's because repetition builds memory. This is how God designed the human mind. What we rehearse becomes what we remember, and what we remember begins to shape who we become. If you repeat a message long enough, whether consciously or subconsciously, it becomes a part of the architecture of your inner life. If you continually rehearse worry, your mind will become a sanctuary for anxiety. If you continually repeat criticism about yourself or others, your heart becomes fluent in negativity. If fear is the background noise of your mind, eventually becomes the background of your life. But the inverse can also be true. When you repeatedly rehearse truth, peace, hope, the promises of God, those things become the scaffolding that holds you steady. As we looked last week, Paul, the church planter who wrote most of the letters in the New Testament, was writing to the Philippians. While he was in jail, they were nervous, they were anxious about him, concerned for his well-being, sending money, enabling him to get food while he was in prison, something that was not provided for prisoners. And he reminds them that they can take their anxiety to God, share all their needs to God of what they are hoping for, but then they need to shift their thinking, to think on those things that are pure, lovely, admirable, noble, true, excellent, righteous, and praiseworthy. In Philippians chapter 4. He's trying to tell them to think repeatedly about what's true, think repeatedly about what's noble, think repeatedly about what's right and pure and excellent. And it's because truth repeated becomes truth remembered. And truth remembered becomes truth lived. This last week, my wife and I were on a walk in between all the feasts. And we were having this conversation. Because for me, Philippians chapter 4 and another verse from 2 Corinthians 10 have been a big part of helping me with this battle in the mind. This idea of taking my thoughts captive. And for her, a verse that's really helped her is this one that says, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. And if you take that, when it comes to your thoughts and your feelings, see, we're bent towards believing whatever we think is what's true, or whatever we feel is what's true. When in reality, we could be completely off. And so if you take those thoughts and you take those feelings that are overwhelming you, that are dark and disturbing, and some of us have really vivid imaginations. If we can take those negative thoughts and feelings to God, we submit them to God, we surrender them to God and say, God, I am feeling this way. Take this from me. Resist the darkness. Don't let darkness take over your heart or your mind. And when you do that, it dissipates. The darkness dissipates. This is why hymns matter, why worship matters, why the scripture matters. It's filling our minds with what is true. God built our minds so that whatever we put on repeat sinks deeper in with intention and becomes our identity. It's important to remember, we don't drift into spiritual maturity. We rehearse our way into it. Let me say that again. We don't drift into spiritual maturity. We rehearse our way into it. So number 2, pay attention to the lyrics. Have you ever said that maybe when you were a kid? Oh, Mom, Dad, I don't listen to the lyrics, right? It's just the beat. But we need to pay attention to the lyrics. The stories you listen to eventually become the stories that you live. I don't know who actually said that, but I found that to be true in my life. The stories you listen to eventually become the stories that you live. It points us back to a simple but profound statement about stories and how they shape us. Paul in the letter to the Romans says this, faith comes from hearing and hearing through the word of Christ. The context for this verse is that the same people of Israel who were repeating the words of God and whose heritage lived through the stories with God were now the same people whose understanding of the lyrics and the song they were singing was missing. See, Jesus comes to earth, lives a sinless life. He is their Messiah. He has come to rescue them and all who might believe in them. As he's preparing for the cross, he drops this bombshell, this truth, this life, this God is actually for everyone. That everyone, Jew and Gentile, is welcome into the family of God. And now we're being told in Romans that faith will grow beyond the people of Israel and include the Gentiles. He's saying we need to pay attention to the lyrics. You know, when I was a kid, I was a fan of all sorts of different types of music. Middle school was marked mostly by Run DMC and the Beastie Boys. I was into hip hop. But then come to high school, all of a sudden, I was into heavy metal. And I should be more honest, it was more like the glam rock. The big hair. I was a big Striper fan. In fact, I grew out my hair. I didn't have it quite as big as that's me in high school. Ancient times. And I was a big Striper fan. I had every album. To Hell with the Devil. That's what their album was called, not me saying weird things. And they were my favorite. I'd go and see them in concert. And I knew everything about them, right? I knew that Oz Fox's real name was Richard Alfonso Martinez. I knew that Michael Sweet and his brother were from Orange County. But here's what's happened. What happened? The moment I went off to college, I stopped buying their music. I'd switched. MC Hammer was now my favorite. I even dressed up like Vanilla Ice for Halloween, like I'm back in my hip-hop era. But when I talked to someone about Stryper, they would bring him up, and I would start talking about him like I still loved the band, but I hadn't paid attention in years. I think they're still making albums. But sadly, if we're not careful, we can do the same thing with God. We can say, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus. I know the stories. I know the songs. I have an understanding of who God is, but we're actually no longer trying to walk in the way of wisdom. No longer following the way of Jesus. No longer aspiring to be more like Proverbs 4 that says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. See, what goes in eventually comes out. This is true of Thanksgiving. This is true of our thoughts. This is true of the content we consume. It's repeatedly true of the messages that we hear again and again. Input becomes output. Every lyric, every headline, every TikTok video, playlist, podcast, and conversation is doing something to us, forming us, shaping how we see the world, how we interpret life, and what we believe about God and ourselves. You might notice I quote Tim Keller quite a bit. He was a pastor in New York City. He had a front row seat to loving people who are on the front line of societal and cultural change. And he had this really beautiful demeanor. He didn't denounce the culture, but instead wanted people to know that everything around us is making an impact on us, if not in us. And so he would talk about this idea of preaching the gospel to yourself every day. Well, what does that actually mean? See, the gospel, that is the good news that Jesus is king. When we remind ourselves of that, it begins to reshape things. See, the gospel is that a loving God came to rescue us. No one else is coming. But Jesus came and lived a perfect life and taught with authority and brought healing to people and loved the outcast. And he loved us so much that he took upon himself the sins of humanity. And it killed him. But on the third day, he rose from the dead. Jesus is alive, and when you trust him, when you follow him, when you surrender your life to him, and he becomes the center of your life, his spirit comes to live within you. And the truth is, reminding yourself daily that when you are following Jesus, you are now a son or daughter of the King of Kings. It shapes your identity. It reminds you of what's true, even when it doesn't feel like that. See, it's important to understand and reflect on what really matters, what your identity is, what love is, what freedom is, as described in the scriptures, as God has revealed to us in Jesus. But because we have these stories playing in the background, if we're not careful, we can absorb them without examining them. There are some songs that rehearse the story of self, telling us to follow your heart, be your own truth. You do you. There are some that rehearse the story of despair, that nothing lasts, that life is random, that love always fails. And there are some songs that are rehearsing the story of self-salvation, that your worth is in your hustle, your beauty, your performance, your willingness to work hard. Yet Paul tells us in Romans chapter 10 that faith comes from hearing the story of Jesus, hearing the truth of the gospel, hearing the words that re-narrate our world according to God's reality. That there is a loving God who is with us, who will one day make all things right, who reigns even now over this invisible kingdom, a kingdom spread not through weapons of war, but through faith, love, and hope, a kingdom that goes beyond boundaries, welcoming all who say yes to the King Jesus. This is why hymns and truth-filled worship matter so deeply. They serve as counter formation. They give you a different set of lyrics, a different story, a different narrative. When the world is loud, these songs of faith help our heart remember what's real. If you grew up with any sort of church background and maybe your parents' church sang hymns, think about what singing words like this and believing words like this can do to your heart, to your soul. Lyrics like, when peace like a river attendeth my way, or great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father, or on Christ, the solid rock, I stand. These are no longer just songs. They become practices of spiritual formation. They are truths set to melody so that your heart can carry it long after your mind forgets. Remember, Proverbs 4 said, guard your heart. That's not an invitation to fear. It's an invitation to discernment. Guard what enters your inner life, because your inner life shapes your outer living. What we listen to, what we watch, what we say, it affects us. So we need to ask ourselves, what are the lyrics shaping your imagination right now? Who is narrating your world? Is your playlist discipling you towards truth or away from it? And then number 3, keep truth on loop. Psalm 40, verse 3 says this, He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and put their trust in the Lord. Or this one, Psalm 119. Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light for my path. We've all had songs get stuck in our heads. Sometimes welcome, sometimes very unwelcome. Remember that song, It's Friday? That haunted me for years. The reason is simple. Repetition doesn't just stay in your ears, it actually settles in your heart. Spiritually, the same thing happens. When you keep God's truth on loop, when you rehearse His character, promises, and presence, something begins to shift inside of you. Not instantly, not magically, but steadily, quietly, formationally. Songs about Jesus are designed with this in mind. They were written to help the church remember what is true across generations. They are theology wrapped in melody, doctrine that you can hum. And Psalm 40 says God puts a new song in our mouths. He doesn't just give you truth, He gives you the truth that can be sung, that can be remembered, that can help you through the challenges of life. What we sing, we keep. And when you put truth on repeat, several things happen. Truth on repeat becomes peace in the storm. Not because the storm disappears, but because your heart becomes anchored in something unshakable. Truth on repeat becomes strength in the struggle. Not because the struggle gets easier, but because your soul becomes more rooted in God's presence. Truth on repeat becomes hope when you need it most. Not because life gets predictable, but because God's character becomes your foundation. It's important to remember, Psalm 119 tells us God's word is a lamp. Notice, it's not a floodlight. It's not a spotlight. It's not even a full map. It's a lamp. It's just enough truth for the next step that we're supposed to take. Enough light for the next moment. God operates in that way that we might stay close, draw closer to Him when we're unsure of what's next. But if that light is not on repeat, if it's not fed regularly into your heart, you begin walking in the dim light of fear or confusion or anxiety. This is why your spiritual playlist matters, because formation is happening. It's always happening. Your mind is meditating on something. Your heart is believing something. Your soul is absorbing something. The question is not whether you're being shaped, but what is shaping you? Have you allowed negative self-talk to guide you into the dark? The criticisms of others, the criticism of yourself. What if you were to reframe what's true by what God says is true of you? When you and I begin to let God's thoughts become our thoughts, taking our thoughts captive, submitting our thoughts and feelings to God, and letting Him inform and guide, we'll be amazed at the difference it makes. So we need to keep the truth on loop. Keep the message of Jesus close. Keep the promises of God loud in our lives. Keep the hymns of faith nearby so that they can rise in your heart when circumstances fall apart. We need to build a better playlist. When Paul tells the Colossians, let the message of Christ dwell among you richly, he's not giving them a suggestion. He's giving them a survival strategy. He's telling them and us, make sure the loudest thing in your life is the truth of God. Make sure the most dominant soundtrack in your soul is the message of Jesus. So what's on repeat in your life right now? If your playlist has been full of fear, you're not stuck there. If your inner soundtrack has been negativity, there's a new song God has for you. If your mind has been repeating lies about who you are, God wants to rewrite your playlist with truth. Let the message of Jesus dwell in you richly. Let the songs of faith echo in your heart. Let the truth become a soundtrack in your life. And the God of peace can give us a new song. And we simply say, Jesus, I need what you did on the cross to count for me. He gives us access, relationship to the one who created us, the one who